boldly go where no one has gone before.
Trying to call the Dark Brotherhood. But who's going to stop us? I used to be an adventurer like you. Then I took an arrow in the knee.
If it's fighting dragons, Metroids, or if it's good or evil, whatever it is, I like games. Today, however, two genres clash with each other in a list. Sci-fi versus fantasy. Liam is doing sci-fi. I'm doing fantasy. Clifford is deciding whose game genre beats each other. This list is not ranked, so without further ado, let's start this list.
How can I get a tattoo of a quote from a fantasy game and not include it in a fantasy list? For my first entry and the first fantasy entry, I'm going to do Kingdom Hearts. First things first, the story. At least in Kingdom Hearts, it's more noticeable, unlike the Portal games. Both have some plot to them though. In Kingdom Hearts, there are various Disney-themed worlds, whereas Portal, in comparison, however, is much of a muchness in the area looks department. Like other Valve games, there's also no sign of a third Portal. Yes, it may have took its time, but at least there's Kingdom Hearts 3. Plus, it isn't even the third game in the series either. I'm not going to lie, I do like both series, but despite being a fan of Portal first, I prefer Kingdom Hearts. With its mix of wonderful worlds and good combat systems, it can frustrate me, but less than Portal can at times. Kingdom Hearts has some interesting fantasy elements too. And no, I'm not referring to the Final Fantasy characters. Its fantasy elements include spells and a key-shaped sword called the Keyblade, which we can make the gameplay interesting. The heart may be weak, and sometimes the cake is a lie after Liam's Portal entry.
Bioshock isn't the only instance of a sci-fi game that can hold a mirror to human potential. But while other games might try to make a less horror-based tone, by no means does it abandon pretense of the darkness. And this is where Portal comes in. Portal brings you into a mysterious laboratory with a portal gun as your only means of defense and navigation through the increasingly deadly lab. And it has you play around with physics too as you try to find your way through. As well as dodging turrets, completing tests for GLaDOS, you have to figure out the right momentum, the right placements to get you through. A semblance of actual science, and a type of science I was not fond of in the slightest back in school. A video game that can make you think, as well as a dark and twisted story, makes for a great entry in the sci-fi game library.
Zelda has asked me to vote between Kingdom Hearts and Portal for round 1. I have decided to vote for Portal because basically I think Disney is already trying to take over the world, so they really don't need the clout from Kingdom Hearts.
Most people emerge from suspension terribly undernourished. I want to congratulate you on beating the odds and somehow managing to pack on a few pounds.
BioWare started in expanding the Star Wars mythos with 2 fantastic games set in a new era. But the Mass Effect series it created is my next pick. While Star Wars will always hold a special place in my heart, what Mass Effect has achieved is a universe of great storytelling, for the most part, and it created its own universe rather than confine itself to a playground of pre-established structure. Where before it was focused on Sith troopers and lightsabers, BioWare trades it in for Falcon rifles and husks. Much like StarCraft, Mass Effect also poses questions about the future, about what lies beyond our own solar system. The species, both friendly and non, And of course there's the memes.
Well, bang, okay?
But what Bioshock achieved was nothing short of a great mark in the whole of all sci-fi media, not just video gaming.
Okay, this might not be as well known as Liam's sci-fi entry, but that doesn't mean it sucks. Cameo Elements of Power is a wonderful title from Rare that has the typical flair you'll find from games made by them. Despite being on Xbox instead of a Nintendo system, it also has a wonderful Nintendo-esque feeling to it, which makes sense considering it started development on a Nintendo system after all, and Rare used to make Nintendo games, which makes for an interesting title in the Xbox landscape. If I had the sci-fi side, I may have put Perfect Dark here, but for that series, only one of them I consider good, the original N64 one, that is. Whereas with Cameo, there's only one full stop, but I do consider it good. Instead of a alien sex simulator with a story on the side, Cameo does not have any sex and is more story. What I've played of it so far, the story is awesome and has wonderful level design. You play as a cute elf princess called Cameo, who uses transformations for attacking and solving puzzles. This was a 360 launch title, but even so, that doesn't make it less worth it. Graphically, it may not be the best 360 game, but play it on the One X and that statement changes. If you're a fan of fantasy, adventure, and or Rare, you're doing yourself a disservice not giving this game a try. One thing I dislike about this game though is the lack of sequels, which Liam's sci-fi entry does have. Unfortunately, this is it for Cameo. It deserves sequels though, in my and some other players' opinion. If you have an Xbox 360, I suggest you to pick up a copy. Same if you have a One, as it was one of the first games to be backwards compatible on the Xbox One, and is even included in Rare Replay. This is one of my favourite Xbox titles. This is not the first time I used footage of this on a list clip, but it's the first time it actually had a spot on one, and in my opinion it deserves one, even if it's among more well-known titles. But even the little guy deserves a mention from time to time.
Okay, round 2 is between Cameo, which honestly before now I had never heard of before, and Mass Effect. Mass Effect, the big title that everyone has heard of, or Cameo, which even though the animations were cool, I guess, I am going to go with Mass Effect because John Shepard, Mass Effect, obviously.
God.
Next up is the Fable trilogy, a wonderful Xbox exclusive series with a side order of select PC entries. You have the original Fable that started originally on the original Xbox, then Fable 2 on 360, followed up lastly by Fable 3 on 360. There were some spin-offs, but I'll be basing my entry on the main games only. All three games have a good and evil system which allows you to execute missions in both manners, or a separate mission, same place. Despite this choice of good and evil, in all cases the good choices lead to the canon ending. But that didn't stop me playing the evil route in my past Fable Let's Play. Both Fable and Liam's sci-fi entry both use powers in interesting ways. Mine, though, come from the fantasy magic approach, but like your actions, there are good and evil ones too. Unfortunately, the stories of all three don't feel as connected as I would like them to be. Being honest with you, Fable 2 is set 500 years after the original, but the third has a smaller gap though of only 50 years. The last two seem the most connected, but still not as connected as I'd like. The only connections between the three is the overall location and one character. Otherwise, they feel a bit different, but that isn't necessarily a bad thing, as it gives them each their own unique feeling a bit. This is a series I really like to see continue, but due to the original developers, Lionhead's closure, the chance may be gone, which is a pain as the main three titles have wonderful stories, and I'd love to see how the worlds change after the time passed between titles. The original game got a 360 remaster in the same vein as Halo Anniversary, called, unsurprisingly, Fable Anniversary. How creative, Microsoft! A for effort! Not! Fable Anniversary, in my opinion, is an alright way to play the original game, but if you don't feel that way, the original Xbox non-remastered editions work on the 360, but not the Xbox One. For the Xbox One though, you can play all three main ones due to the backwards compatibility, but the first is via Anniversary. All three though have an Xbox One X patch, including the not on PC, or at least at the time of this video. Number 2, if you're a PC user though, your PC Fable experiences are limited, both natively and via emulation. On Steam, all you have is Fable 1 in both styles. Fable 2 didn't get a PC port. Fable 3 had a PC port, but is no longer purchasable on Steam. But if you have a way to play them, they are worth playing, as what welcomes you is an interesting atmosphere and story with replayability via the good and evil system.
The sci-fi genre has a fantastic reputation of reinventing our own world, exploring facets of humanity present in our dreams and nightmares, and Bioshock is the best example of this. Thrust into the world of Rapture, you're confronted with a world of genetic modification, big daddies, and an individualist utopia that has gone terribly wrong. The genre in general has the potential to hold a mirror to human ideas and endeavour. We've seen it in a positive light with Star Trek, and yet this dark and twisted mirror exists too. You add in vibes from the first half of the 20th century America, and you have a sci-fi masterpiece in Bioshock. The gameplay is fantastic, having you tactically fight against Rapture's denizens with a mix of revolvers, Tommy guns, and genetic powers including fire, electricity, and telekinesis, as you discover the horrors of Rapture. Fantasy can create and reinvent worlds, but yet sci-fi has the potential to be a mirror for our future, rather than some attempt of trying to re-visualize medieval times as a place of wonder, when more often than not, the case was far from.
Okay, round 3. And this one's actually tough. It was between Fable and Bioshock, which I've gotta say was really hard to pick. I really think Fable is a good game, but Bioshock is like huge and really important. So and it doesn't love Big Daddy, so Bioshock is.
Hallelujah.
What I love about the RTS genre is you are put in the commander's seat of a faction, with the future of everything in the palm of your hand. And StarCraft is yet another great example of this. Made by the same team that gave us Overwatch and Warcraft, StarCraft also offers another fantastic world-building experience, showing the genre's potential to explore the unknown regions of space, something that continues to capture imaginations of so many people today. The imaginations of Lucas, Roddenberry, and many other great creators have done so much already, but in spite of this, Blizzard is still able to find something new. Pitting humanity against mysterious alien races is nothing new, but the way it tells its story and once again introduces questions about the challenges we might face if we do begin to move beyond the stars, as well as bringing the fun we come to expect from the team at Blizzard, is still done excellently.
It's dangerous to go alone. Take this. This entry is on Legend of Zelda. There's been no Nintendo console without one. Well, no great selling Nintendo systems without one would be a better statement. Starting over 30 years ago and still great. Yes, there have been a few bad ones, but they went on a Nintendo system? Yes, there is more bad titles in the Legend of Zelda series than there are titles overall in StarCraft, but StarCraft is also a younger series than Zelda, so its title count being less is understandable. What isn't, though, is StarCraft devs looking like they took counting lessons from Gabe Newell. Despite all Zelda's games having a Link, and most of the time a Princess Zelda, the games can have different atmospheres going for them, ranging from nice and cartoony to dark and gloomy. And I like it because of this. Most of the time the story consists of a Link going to rescue a Princess Zelda from a Ganon/Ganondorf, who the Link fights at the end of the game. Sounds a tad like Mario when I put it that way, but that isn't always the story in Zelda. There is some of a different one and or has additional elements to it on top. This can make when it is the same different. There's top-down style, 2D platformer style, 3D adventure, and more recently, open world with Breath of the Wild, making for a difference among similarity. If you call yourself a gamer and haven't at some time at least played Zelda, what have you been playing? This, in my opinion, is a game series every gamer needs to have played at least once. And I don't mean just fantasy fans, I seriously mean all. So my advice, if you haven't played any, is download an emulator and cross your fingers the site you manage to find a ROM on doesn't give you a virus. And I mean a computer one, not a human one. FYI.
Now for round 4 is between StarCraft and Zelda. And unlike all the other ones where it went sci-fi, this time I'm finally going for the fantasy Zelda. Zelda is way more influential and has better games. I personally prefer the 2D top-down or to the others, but yeah, Zelda wins.
For my side swap, I have chosen the Wipeout series. I almost went with F-Zero, but I've been playing Wipeout for longer, so it gets the spot. Instead, like F-Zero, you fly around at ludicrous speeds in hovercrafts. Unlike some other series on this list, Wipeout does not have a story, but that doesn't mean what's left is bad. The series has wonderful track designs which you go through with the equally wonderfully designed hovercraft. I remember when I first touched the series back on PSP. Yeah, I don't go all the way back, so what? I start on the PSP entry Wipeout Pulse and got hooked. What hooked me was my love of sci-fi plus its soundtrack.
and the future entries I have touched still don't disappoint. Racing is not a genre you really see paired with fantasy, but it works well with sci-fi, and Wipeout is one of the top examples.
So for my swap entry, I decided to go with a game that combines two things I love: Lord of the Rings and real-time strategy. The franchise is able to fit so well into a number of video game genres: action-adventure, RPG, and of course RTS. And again, I love RTS. I love the feeling of playing God on the battlefield, and that your quick thinking can easily turn the tide of a battle. You combine that with the world building and lore of Tolkien, and you have the Battle for Middle-earth games. While both are brilliant, the second was the best in my opinion, as it expanded the scope of Middle-earth further than any Lord of the Rings media that had come out of Jackson's films at that point. We got glimpses of Erebor, Mirkwood, Dol Guldur, and the wider powers of the North for Middle-earth, and I simply have loved to play it. I just hope they get re-released at some point.
Okay, and now I'm doing the swap round for for Middle-earth and Wipeout. I wasn't aware of Wipeout before now, so it really had to be Battle for Middle-earth. It's a the Middle-earth games are pretty good, and yeah, Battle for Middle-earth wins.
Sci-fi also has the advantage of a pool of great stories, and Star Wars is just one of them. Many of video games have been able to capture the feel of great heroes, from Starfleet captains to Spartans, but the Jedi Knight series stands above them for me. It does what a great Star Wars game should do: create a story that continues to expand the Star Wars mythos and universe, giving the player a small taste of being a Jedi, from using the Force to lightsaber combat and facing both old threats and new. It managed to span 3 games and brought Kyle Katarn into the spotlight of the Star Wars universe, before Disney made him Legends. Sure, there are great medieval series too, but the worlds they are contained in are restrained to the confines of Earth, or Middle-earth, or whatever. Sci-fi is able to span galaxies for goodness sake, and even with magic and other creatures, things like the Force way outclass that.
Final? Lee? This list can't be complete without Final Fantasy. Be it the original turn-based combat or the newer not. They all share good combat systems which are important for good RPGs. Like Zelda from earlier in this list, Final Fantasy has been around for a while, despite being called Final Fantasy. Both Zelda and this released all the way back on the NES, Zelda being a tad older though. I've played several of them over my short time playing them and RPGs, but only finished one story. Even so, the ones I haven't finished were still great, and I hope to go back to and finish them too. And the one I finished was Final Fantasy 15 on my PS4 Pro, and that was awesome and worth playing. This is not Square Enix only representation on this list, but this and the prior representation both deserve their spots, and due to characters from this series being in the other one, Kingdom Hearts, I wouldn't be a fan of both series. I can't mention a lot of the stories in the ones I dabbled in, but they had good starts of one. 15, however, which I did finish, had a good one in my opinion. The music in the games are awesome too, and can help build the atmosphere the game was going for, from an epic piece for a fight like One Winged Angel to something sad like the piece that plays after Aerith dies. Big fucking deal. I spoiled a 22-year-old game. Who the fuck cares? Yes, I know both those examples are from only one game in the series, but they were the first things that popped in my head when thinking about music and Final Fantasy. This one series, every RPG fan needs to have touched at least once if they want to be called a real RPG fan, in my opinion. Hopefully, we never see a real Final Fantasy. As if there were, it could be a very sad day in gaming to see this once great series finally disappear.
And round 5, I pick between Final Fantasy and Jedi Knight. This was quite tough. I really like the JRPG Final Fantasy games, but I am going to pick the Jedi Knight because I'm also a really big fan of Old Republic, the MMO, and also the other one that came out on PSP. I can't remember the name of it right now. But anyway, the Jedi game, the Star Wars games are honestly the best thing about Star Wars, since the movies are kind of crap, except for the main trilogy and Force Awakens, I guess.
What the hell are you doing?
Now the scores have gone 5 to Liam and 1 to Zelda. So Liam in the end wins this sci-fi versus fantasy. It was really a good job on Zelda, but honestly, sci-fi just has better games apparently. Thank you for joining us. Please click the links, click subscribe, and have a nice one.
Got to get you in there, inside the dome. There's a war starting.
The Alpha Ceph?
No. Remember those guys who shot you full of K-bolts in Siberia? The guys who had you in lockdown for God knows how many years? The guys who tore the nanosuit from my flesh? The guys who were going to do the same to you? Cell? Those guys.